There's a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. I know this because I'd had 8 hours the night before my flight, a full cup of coffee at the airport, and still felt like something that had been left out in the rain for too long. Warped, a little soft in the wrong places, not quite holding its original shape anymore. That was me at Gate 14, JFK, 10:47 p.m., waiting to board a 9-hour flight to Lisbon with a carry-on full of tools, a client's money, and the particular silence of someone who had recently stopped being half of something. My name is Wren Calloway. I restore antique instruments for a living. Violins, cellos, harpsichords, the occasional lute that someone's grandmother left in an attic for 40 years. People bring me things they've given up on. Things with cracked bodies and snapped strings and tuning pegs that won't hold anymore. I take them apart, figure out what went wrong, and put them back together so they can make music again. The irony of my current personal situation was not lost on me. I was 28 years old, and I had not cried once since the breakup. Not at the airport the day Simone left. Not when I packed her records into a box. Not even when I found her handwriting on a grocery list tucked inside a cookbook 6 weeks later. Oat milk, the good kind, fresh basil, don't forget. I had held that piece of paper for a long time. Then I put it back exactly where I found it and closed the cookbook and didn't open it again. My therapist, who I was definitely still seeing and definitely not ghosting, called this compartmentalization. I called it being functional. We disagreed on whether those were the same thing. The Portugal trip had come at the right time, or maybe the desperate time, which in my experience are often the same thing. A collector in Sintra had a 1743 Baroque cello that needed restoration work only someone with my specific combination of stubbornness and obsessive attention to detail could pull off. He'd been referred to me by a client in London. He was paying very well. I said yes before he finished the sentence. The gate area was that specific kind of crowded, where everyone is pretending the other people don't exist. A businessman in a suit was doing aggressive things on a laptop. 2 college students were sharing earbuds and laughing at something on a phone. An older couple sat close together in the way that only people who've been together a long time can, not touching, but somehow completely intertwined. I looked away from them faster than I meant to. I had my own earbuds in, nothing playing, because sometimes you need the prop of looking unavailable, even when the only person trying to talk to you is your own brain. I was halfway through mentally cataloging everything I'd need to assess the cello when I heard her before I saw her. A laugh, bright and a little incredulous, like someone had just said something that was simultaneously absurd and completely correct. "No, I know what you're going to say," the voice said, clearly on a phone call. "And I'm telling you the lavender oolong is objectively superior, and you're just wrong, Daniel. That's not an opinion. That's a fact with feelings attached to it." She was standing maybe 10 feet away, rolling carry-on handle in one hand, white cane in the other, phone tucked between her ear and shoulder, with the practiced confidence of someone who had been navigating the world on her own terms for a long time. Zara, though I didn't know her name yet, was wearing a burnt orange blazer over a white linen shirt, dark jeans, and the expression of someone who finds life genuinely, unironically interesting. She was laughing again now, shaking her head at whatever Daniel was saying, and there was something about the quality of her attention, even on a phone call, even in a crowded gate, that made the space around her feel different, more present somehow. I noticed I was staring and looked back at my phone like a normal person. I was not being weird about it. I was just observing. I observe things. It's professional. We ended up in the same row. Of course we did. She had the window seat, which, she informed the flight attendant cheerfully, was mostly sentimental, and I had the middle, which is the seat that people choose when they've genuinely stopped having preferences about things. The aisle seat stayed empty for boarding, and for 20 minutes I thought we might both get lucky. Then a man with too much carry-on luggage and not enough spatial awareness arrived, and we were officially 3 across. strangers sealed together for 9 hours above the Atlantic. Zara settled in with the efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times. Cane folded, bag stowed, headphones out, a small tin of what turned out to be loose-leaf tea placed on the tray table like it was the most natural thing in the world. She opened it, held it close, and inhaled slowly. Then she smiled to herself. I had never in my life envied a tin of tea. New experiences everywhere. We didn't talk during takeoff. I had my fake listening earbuds in. She had real ones. The city lights of New York tilted and disappeared beneath us, and the cabin went dark in that collective way that long flights do, like everyone silently agreed to stop performing wakefulness for a few hours. I was trying to read an article about Baroque instrument varnish techniques and failing completely because my brain kept drifting to the grocery list in the cookbook and the way Simone used to steal the blanket without ever waking up to apologize for it. Grief is strange. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just sits next to you on a flight to Lisbon, quiet and uninvited, and waits. I don't know exactly when she fell asleep. One moment she was there, contained, upright, a person with edges, and then the cabin hit a soft patch of turbulence. Nothing dramatic, just a slow sideways lean, and when it settled, she had leaned with it. Her head came to rest on my shoulder with a weight that was somehow both completely accidental and completely precise, like a key finding a lock it wasn't supposed to fit. I froze. The article about varnish techniques ceased to exist. Every single function of my brain redirected to the singular fact of this stranger's head on my shoulder. The warmth of it, the realness of it, the way it made me aware of my own body in a way I hadn't been in months. I should have shifted, cleared my throat, done the polite, normal thing that creates distance between strangers on airplanes. I did not do that. I told myself it was because I didn't want to wake her. I was lying, but it was a gentle lie. The kind you tell yourself in the dark, when the truth is too specific to look at directly. She slept quietly for a while. I stayed very still and stared at the seat back in front of me like it contained the secrets of the universe. The man on the aisle was already snoring. The cabin was dark and humming and suspended in that particular between-world feeling that long flights create. Not here, not there, just altitude and time. I had stopped trying to read. I had stopped trying to think about Simone or the cello or what I was going to do when I landed. I was just there, shoulder occupied, weirdly calm, in the way that you sometimes get calm when something takes the decision-making entirely out of your hands. And then Zara started talking. Not loudly, barely above a whisper, the thin, unguarded register of someone deep in a dream. Her brow furrowed slightly. Her hand, resting on her own knee, tightened for a moment. And then, clear enough that there was no mistaking it, she said, "I just don't want to turn gray before I get there." That was it. 7 words. She didn't say anything else. Her face smoothed out again. Her breathing stayed deep and even, and whatever door had opened in her sleep closed just as quietly. But I was sitting there with those 7 words in my chest like a bell that had just been struck, still ringing, resonating, finding frequencies I didn't know I had. I just don't want to turn gray before I get there. I didn't know what she meant. I didn't know where there was for her, or what gray meant in her particular interior world. I just knew, with the irrational certainty of someone who spends their life listening to what broken things are trying to say, that I had just heard something true, something that was none of my business, and somehow, at 35,000 feet over the dark Atlantic, felt like the most important thing anyone had said to me in years. I did not sleep for the rest of the flight. When the cabin lights came up slow and gold for the descent into Lisbon, Zara lifted her head from my shoulder with a sharp, quiet inhale, the sound of someone surfacing fast. She straightened immediately, hand going to her hair, and turned toward me with an expression that was equal parts mortified and composed, which is genuinely impressive as a combination. "Oh no," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. Please tell me I didn't drool. I looked at my shoulder. Checked. You're clear, I said. She exhaled. Okay, good. I'm Zara. She held out her hand, totally unself-conscious, already moving on. I took it. Ren, I said. She smiled, slow, a little crooked, like she was already finding something about this funny that I hadn't caught up to yet. Ren, she repeated, like she was tasting the word. That's a good name for someone who was too polite to move. If this story already has you, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. I want to know. Have you ever heard something that wasn't meant for you? That changed everything anyway? Tell me. I'll be reading every single one. Lisbon from above looks like someone spilled terracotta and kept going. I know this because I'd been there twice before. Once for work. Once for reasons I'd filed under bad decisions that made good stories. And even from the window seat I wasn't supposed to be emotionally attached to. The city had that specific quality of light that makes you feel like you arrived somewhere that's been waiting for you. I noticed this. Then I noticed I was noticing it, which meant the altitude and the zero sleep and the 7 words still rattling around my ribcage were making me sentimental, which was not the plan. The plan was land, get the apartment, sleep 4 hours, email the collector, be professional. The plan did not include having feelings about city light. The plan had also not included Zara, and yet here we were, seat 24B and 24A, descending into a city neither of us fully belonged to. Her hand still faintly warm from the handshake that had lasted maybe 1 second longer than it needed to. I was not reading into that. I was simply noting it as data. The seatbelt sign clicked off, and the cabin became that specific controlled chaos of everyone reaching for overhead bins at the same time. Zara moved through it with the practiced efficiency of someone who has learned that other people's panic is not her problem. She had her cane unfolded before I'd even unclipped my belt. Bag pulled from under the seat with one clean motion. The small tea tin slipped into her jacket pocket like punctuation. I, meanwhile, managed to hit myself in the chin with my own carry-on, which is the kind of thing that happens when you've been awake for 14 hours and spent 9 of them being emotionally ambushed by a stranger's dream. You okay? Zara asked. She was facing forward, but there was something in the tilt of her head that said she'd heard the thud and the small, undignified sound I'd made after. Fine, I said, just relocating my jaw. She pressed her lips together in a way that was clearly suppressing a smile. Happens to the best of us, she said, and moved toward the aisle with the steady, unhurried confidence of someone who has never once needed to perform composure, because she simply has it. We walked through the jet bridge in that strange, liminal way that follows a long flight. Not quite strangers anymore, not quite anything else either. Just 2 people who had shared 9 hours and 1 accidental moment of intimacy that only one of us had been conscious for. I kept pace beside her without deciding to. She navigated the corridor with the easy fluency of someone reading a language others didn't know existed. Slight adjustments, spatial awareness so refined it looked effortless. I had the absurd impulse to offer my arm, and managed to not do it. Because she had not asked for my arm, and also because I had approximately 0 idea what I was doing, and leading with unsolicited physical contact seemed like a fantastic way to ruin whatever this was. Whatever this was. I had been awake too long. First time in Lisbon, she asked, not looking at me, or rather, oriented slightly to my left, which I was already learning was her version of looking at someone. Second time for work, I said. You? She smiled. Fourth. I love it here. The city sounds different than anywhere else I've traveled. Older somehow. Like it's been having the same conversation with the ocean for 500 years, and neither one is tired of it yet. I stopped walking for half a second. Just half. Then I caught up. Because that was a specific kind of sentence. The kind that a person constructs not to impress, but because it's simply how they think, which is somehow so much more disarming than trying. I filed it next to the 7 words and kept moving. The arrivals hall was busy in the way that international airports always are at 7 in the morning. Families, drivers with signs, the collective low-grade anxiety of people who need to be somewhere. Zara slowed just slightly, not stopping, just recalibrating. I watched her do it with the same focused attention I give to instruments when I'm trying to understand what's wrong, except nothing was wrong. She was just reading the room. Differently. Better, maybe. "My hotel confirmation should be in my email," she said, half to herself, already reaching for her phone. Her face changed. Subtle. A small tightening around the mouth, the kind of micro-expression that most people miss. I did not miss it. "Problem?" I asked. She was quiet for 3 seconds, which in context felt like a long time. "The hotel managed to double book my room," she said finally, with the measured calm of someone deciding in real time how much to let show. "Apparently they emailed 3 days ago, which I didn't see. So." She said so, the way people do when they're putting a period on something they haven't actually finished processing. "What does that mean for tonight?" I asked. She tilted her head in that slightly left way. "It means I'm in Lisbon at 7 a.m. with a presentation in 16 hours and nowhere to stay." She paused. "Which is fine. It's fine. I've handled worse." I believed her completely. That was the thing about Zara. She said it's fine, and somehow it didn't sound like a lie or a performance. It sounded like a woman who had genuinely recalibrated her definition of fine to be more expansive than most people's. I also knew, with the specific clarity that comes from being awake too long and emotionally destabilized by 7 words at 35,000 feet, that I was about to say something I hadn't planned to say. My brain sent up a small flare of warning. I ignored it. "I have a 2-bedroom apartment," I said. "Rented it because the collector I'm working with recommended it, and it was cheaper than the hotel options. The second room is empty." Zara turned toward me fully. There was a beat of silence that had texture to it, not awkward, just real. "You don't have to do that," she said. Not a refusal, a checkpoint, making sure I knew what I was offering. "I know," I said. "I'm doing it anyway." She was quiet again. Then, "One condition." "Okay," I said. "You treat me like a person, not a situation." The way she said it wasn't sharp. It wasn't defensive. It was just clear. The kind of clarity that comes from having had to say a thing enough times that you've found the exact words for it. I felt something shift in my chest, not dramatically, just a door opening somewhere. "Done," I said. She nodded once, the matter-of-fact nod of someone finalizing a reasonable agreement. "Then yes, thank you, Ren." She said my name like she'd already decided to keep it. I picked up my bag. She adjusted her grip on her cane. And we walked out of the arrivals hall together into the early Lisbon morning. The city golden and exhaling around us. The kind of light that makes everything look like the beginning of something. My phone buzzed. I already knew who it was before I looked. 3 voice messages from Bex, sent between 3 and 6 a.m. New York time, which meant she'd been awake or she'd woken up specifically to bother me, both of which were equally plausible. I opened the first one. Ren. I had a feeling. I don't know what kind of feeling, but it was a feeling. And I need you to text me the moment you land. Love you. Also drink water. Second message. Okay, you haven't texted, which means either you're dead or something interesting happened, and statistically the second one is more likely so. Third message, and I could hear her sitting up in bed for this one. There was a woman wasn't there. I stared at my phone. I looked at Zara, who was beside me on the curb, face tilted up into the morning sun like she was memorizing the warmth of it. I typed back 3 words. Not like that. Bex responded in 4 seconds. Sure, Jan. I put my phone away. The cab to the apartment took 20 minutes through streets that were narrow and sun-drenched and slightly chaotic in the charming way that Lisbon specializes in. Zara sat with her face toward the window, which I'd noticed she did not do for the view but for the air. The window cracked just enough to let the city in. She asked the driver questions in careful, confident Portuguese, and when he answered, she laughed at something, and they went back and forth for a while in a conversation I couldn't follow. She spoke 4 languages, she mentioned afterward, not as a brag, just as context, the way you mention a tool you have. Tea helps, she said, when I raised an eyebrow. You taste a thing enough times, you learn its language. I turned that sentence over in my mind for the rest of the ride. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building in Alfama, with blue tile on the facade, and a view of the river if you leaned out the kitchen window at the right angle. It smelled like old wood, and someone else's lavender, and the particular cold of a space that had been closed up, and was now being asked to be lived in again. Zara stood in the center of the small living room, and was quiet for a moment. Not lost, not uncertain, just taking inventory in her own way. I watched her do it and felt, again, that specific feeling of witnessing something that most people would miss if they weren't paying attention. She exhaled slowly. Wooden floors, she said. High ceilings. Something flowering on a balcony nearby. She turned in a slow, small arc. Good bones. Yeah, I said. Good bones. There was a beat. Then she turned toward me with that crooked half-smile. So, which room is mine? I showed her. She set her bag down. I went to my own room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands for a while the way I do when I've just handled something fragile and I'm checking to make sure I didn't break it. My phone buzzed again. Bex. 1 sentence this time. You're going to fall so hard and it's going to be beautiful, and I'm already screaming. I locked the phone face down on the mattress. I lay back and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere across the apartment, I heard Zara open her tea tin, and the faint specific scent of something floral drifted under my door, like a question I didn't have an answer to yet. Outside, Lisbon was waking up, trams and pigeons and the low, warm hum of a city that had been having the same conversation with the ocean for 500 years. And me, in a rented apartment in Alfama, 48 hours into a trip I hadn't wanted, lying on my back thinking about 7 words and a woman who had walked into a strange city without a map, and somehow already knew exactly where she was. I closed my eyes. I did not sleep. I gave myself exactly 2 hours. That was the deal I made with my own brain at 8 in the morning, staring at a ceiling that had water stains in the shapes of things I was too tired to interpret. 2 hours of horizontal silence. Not necessarily sleep, just stillness. Just the bare minimum of self-maintenance before I had to be a functional human being in a foreign city. I lasted 40 minutes. The problem with being a person who restores things for a living is that your brain never really stops doing the assessment, cataloging damage, identifying fractures, mapping the distance between what something is and what it used to be. Usually the subject is a 200-year-old violin. That morning, staring at a water stain that looked vaguely like a question mark, the subject was me. 6 months since Simone. 4 months since I stopped crying in parking lots. 2 months since I started accepting work again like a person with a future, instead of someone just filling time until the feeling passed. And 9 hours on a plane next to a woman who talked in her sleep about not turning gray, which my exhausted brain had apparently decided was the most important thing that had happened to me in years. I sat up. I needed coffee. I needed it immediately, and without negotiation. The kitchen was small and well organized in the way that rental apartments sometimes are. Everything in its place, nothing personal, the cupboards stocked with the bare minimum that someone had decided counted as hospitality. I found a stovetop espresso maker and the kind of pre-ground coffee that serious coffee people would have opinions about, and I did not care even slightly because I needed caffeine, and I needed it in the next 4 minutes, or I was going to start making decisions with the part of my brain that had been awake since yesterday. I was filling the water reservoir when I heard her. Not talking this time, just moving. The soft, specific sound of someone navigating a space they'd only had 20 minutes to learn. The cane was folded, I noticed, when she appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had changed into a loose cream-colored shirt and dark linen pants, hair pulled back, and she was holding her phone in one hand with her thumb moving across the screen in a way that I realized after a second was Braille display. Small, refreshable dots under her fingertip. The phone reading the world back to her in a language she'd built fluency in through touch. "Coffee?" I asked. She turned toward my voice. "Is it good coffee?" she said. "No," I said. "It's rental apartment coffee." She considered this with genuine seriousness. "I'll have tea," she said, moving toward the counter with the calibrated confidence I was already starting to recognize as specifically hers. Not performed, not cautious, just precise. She produced the tea tin from her shirt pocket like a magician who has stopped bothering to be theatrical about it. Set it on the counter. Found the kettle, second try, slight adjustment, no comment, and filled it with the ease of someone who had long ago decided that the world was a series of navigable puzzles and not a series of obstacles. I watched her the way I watch everything I find interesting, which is to say with more attention than is probably polite, and a complete inability to stop. "You're staring," she said, without turning around. I opened my mouth, closed it. "I'm observing," I said. "It's professional." She laughed, bright and sudden, and entirely genuine. The same laugh I'd heard at the gate the night before, the one that made the space around her feel more awake. "What's your professional assessment?" she asked, and there was warmth in it, not challenge. I thought about it. "You've done this a long time," I said, "moving through spaces that aren't yours." She was quiet for a moment, the kettle beginning its low initial hiss. "Since I was 26, she said. "So 5 years of practice." She said it simply, the way you state a fact about yourself that used to be heavier than it currently is. "Does it get easier?" I asked. She tilted her head. That left-oriented tilt that I had already, in the span of 12 hours, started to read as her version of looking directly at you. "Different," she said. "Not easier, different. You stop grieving the old way of doing things and start getting genuinely interested in the new way." She paused. "The tea helps with that, actually." The espresso maker started its percussive complaint on the stovetop, and I turned to manage it while Zara finished with the kettle, and for a few minutes we existed in the kitchen in a comfortable parallel. The particular domestic ease of two people who don't know each other well enough to have expectations, and are therefore free to just be in the same space without performance. It was, I realized, the most relaxed I had felt in months, which was insane, because I was in a foreign kitchen running on no sleep with a stranger I'd met 9 hours ago. And yet, there it was. I poured my coffee. She poured her water, temperature checked against her wrist, a small automatic gesture, and added the leaves to a small strainer she'd produced from the same jacket pocket that seemed to function as a portable pantry. The smell that rose from her cup was something I didn't have a name for. Floral but not sweet. Warm but not heavy. The kind of smell that made you think of a specific afternoon you couldn't quite place. "What is that?" I asked. She smiled slowly, like she'd been waiting for the question. "Osmanthus oolong," she said, "grown in the Wuyi Mountains. Notes of apricot and something that doesn't translate well into English. The Chinese word for it is a specific kind of golden quality, like light through something amber." She held the cup out toward me, an offering. I leaned in and breathed it in, and she was right. It was exactly that. Light through something amber. "Daniel thinks lavender oolong is superior," she said, with the tone of someone citing a moral failing. "Daniel is wrong," I said. She pointed at me. "See? You get it." I sat down at the small kitchen table. She found the chair across from me with one smooth motion. setting her cup down in the center of the table first, and then orienting herself around it. I wrapped both hands around my coffee and looked at her in thought. Not for the first time, and not for the last. Who are you? Not out loud. Just the shape of the question, sitting in my chest next to the 7 words and the laugh at the gate and the way she'd said good bones about the apartment like she was reading the room's biography. Tell me about the presentation, I said, because it was the practical thing, and I was trying to be practical. She straightened slightly, not nervously, just shifting into a different register. Hotel group wants to overhaul their entire beverage program, she said. 15 properties across Europe. They've been doing tea as an afterthought. Bag in a cup, hot water, done. I'm trying to convince them that tea is an experience, that it's the same as wine, terroir, harvest, processing, the relationship between what's in the cup and where it came from. She paused. I have 16 slides, 3 sample tins, and the unshakable belief that I'm right. I looked at her across the table. Are you nervous? I asked. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I'm awake, she said. That's my version of nervous. I understood that completely and immediately, which probably should have told me something. Beck sent a voice message at 9 a.m. Lisbon time, which was 4 a.m. in New York, which meant she had set an alarm specifically to check on me, which was both deeply annoying and the reason she was my best friend. I listened to it with one earbud in, while Zara reviewed her presentation notes on her phone, thumb moving fast across the braille display. Okay, so, I've been thinking, Beck said, in the tone she uses when she's been thinking for several hours already, and I need you to not do the thing where you help someone so much that you forget to be helped. Remember Barcelona? Remember the architect? You spent 4 days fixing her itinerary, and then you flew home without telling her how you felt and you were miserable for a month. I took out the earbud. I looked at the table. The architect in Barcelona was a whole other story that I was not going to think about right now. Everything okay? Zara asked, and I realized my silence had been loud enough to register. Fine, I said. Friend checking in. Bex? She asked, and then caught herself, a small, surprised half-smile. You mentioned her on the plane, when you were texting. Yeah, I said. She's a lot. The good kind of a lot. The only kind worth having, I said, without thinking, and something in Zara's expression shifted, soft and quick, like light changing on a surface. We took our cups to the small balcony off the living room, barely big enough for 2 chairs and a potted plant that was doing its best, and sat in the early Lisbon morning while the city assembled itself below us. Trams and pigeons, and the sound of someone a few buildings over playing guitar badly and with great feeling. Zara had her face tilted up and slightly right toward the sound. Her cup was in both hands. She looked, I thought, like someone who had decided a long time ago to be completely present in whatever moment she was in, and had gotten very good at it. I thought about the 7 words again. I just don't want to turn gray before I get there. And I thought about the water stain on my ceiling that looked like a question mark. And I thought about Simone's grocery list tucked inside the cookbook. And I thought about how I spent my professional life coaxing dead things back into music and had somehow not applied any of that logic to myself in 6 months. You're quiet, Zara said. Occupational hazard, I said. I work alone mostly, in a workshop, with instruments that don't talk back. She turned toward me, that left tilt, that specific quality of attention. What does it feel like? She asked. Restoring something? I thought about it, really thought about it, the way the question deserved. Like having a conversation, I said finally, with something that's been trying to say something for a long time. And you're just finally listening well enough to hear it. The balcony was quiet for a moment. Below us, Lisbon went on being Lisbon, ancient and golden and completely unbothered. Zara turned her face back toward the sun. Yeah, she said softly, like I'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. I think I know exactly what that feels like. She said it simply, without weight or flourish. And yet I felt it land somewhere specific in my chest. Not dramatically, not like a lightning bolt, but the way the right note lands when you're tuning something by ear. A small, precise, unmistakable resonance. I looked at my coffee. I looked at my hands. I looked at the city below us, terracotta and gold and very old. I was running on no sleep in a foreign country, sitting on a balcony too small for two people, with a woman I had known for 12 hours, and I was not okay exactly, but I was something. Something that wasn't the warped, rain-softened version of myself that had sat at gate 14 hours ago. Something that felt, tentatively and without full commitment, like the beginning of a shape I recognized. I did not examine this too closely. Instead, I finished my coffee. Asked Zara if she wanted more tea. She said yes. I went inside to make it, and I did not think about the way she'd said yeah. Soft and certain, like an answer to a question I hadn't known I was asking. I absolutely did not think about that. Not even a little. Not more than 4 or 5 times in the next 10 minutes anyway. The presentation was at 2 p.m. in a hotel conference room in Chiato that looked exactly like every hotel conference room in the world, which is to say aggressively neutral, lit by the kind of fluorescent light that makes everyone look like they're testifying before a committee, and furnished with chairs that suggested comfort without committing to it. I know this because I was there, which had not been the plan. The plan, as I had outlined it to myself on the balcony that morning, was to drop Zara at the hotel, wish her well, go back to the apartment, sleep 4 hours, then take the train to Sintra to meet the collector. Clean, practical, professional. The plan lasted until we were in the cab, and Zara's phone rang and she answered it, and I watched her face do the thing. The small controlled tightening. The breath held just a half second too long. And when she hung up, she said, very calmly, "The shipping company lost one of my sample tins." And I said, "Which one?" before I'd made any decision to be involved. And she said, "The Darjeeling First Flush, which is the one I was opening with." And I said, "Okay. Is there anywhere in Lisbon that would carry it?" And she turned toward me with an expression that was equal parts surprise and something warmer and said, "Theoretically, yes, but I'd need someone who knows the city." And that was it. That was the entire negotiation. I texted the collector to push our call by 3 hours. He was gracious about it. I chose not to examine my own motivations too carefully. We found the tea in a small specialty shop in Barro Alto that smelled like the inside of a very civilized dream. Dark wood shelves, glass canisters. The owner, a compact Portuguese man named Felipe, who had opinions about oxidation levels that Zara engaged with at length and with genuine enthusiasm, while I stood slightly behind them, feeling like I was watching a conversation happen in a language that was technically English, but operated on frequencies I was still calibrating to. They went back and forth, Zara describing exactly what she needed in terms of flavor profile, Philippe responding with the focused energy of someone who takes his work as seriously as she takes hers. At one point, she held a canister close and inhaled slowly, and the expression on her face was so specific, not just evaluation, but something closer to recognition. Like finding a word you'd been reaching for, that I had to look at the shelf beside me for a moment because I was staring again, and I had made a private promise to myself to be less obvious about it. I was failing the promise consistently. "This one," she said finally, setting the canister on the counter. "This is better than what I lost." Felipe looked quietly delighted. I paid before she could reach for her card. She turned toward me immediately. "Ren, consider it an investment in the presentation," I said. "I have a professional interest in watching you be right about tea." She held the moment for a beat. Then, "You're going to stay for it, aren't you?" It wasn't quite a question. "If that's okay," I said. She picked up the canister. "It's okay," she said. And the way she said it, simple, unhurried, like something she'd decided without needing to deliberate, did something specific to the inside of my chest that I filed away for later examination and immediately did not examine. The conference room had 7 people in it when we arrived. 5 hotel executives in varying degrees of expensive casualness. A woman named Patricia, who was apparently the director of guest experience, and had the focused energy of someone who has sat through many presentations and will decide in the first 4 minutes whether this one matters. And a young assistant named Marco, who brought water and looked like he was hoping something interesting would happen. I sat in the back. Zara sat up at the front, with the unhurried efficiency I had already cataloged as characteristic. Sample tins arranged in a specific order, phone on the table with her notes pulled up on braille display, the new Darjeeling first flush given the anchor position she'd originally designed the opening around. She did not ask for help setting up. I did not offer it. We had an understanding. Patricia was already watching her with the particular attention of someone recalibrating their expectations, which I recognized as a good sign. It meant the first impression had already done something. "I want to start with a question," Zara said, without preamble, without the performative warm-up that most presenters use to settle their own nerves. She was settled already. "When was the last time a cup of tea made you feel something?" The room was quiet in the way that rooms get, when someone has said a thing that is slightly more real than the space was prepared for. Patricia's pen stopped moving. Zara let the silence sit for exactly the right amount of time. Long enough to be intentional, short enough not to be theatrical. "Because that's the gap," she said. "Not between good tea and bad tea. Between tea as a transaction and tea as an experience. And that gap is where your guests are either remembering your properties or forgetting them." She opened the Darjeeling first flush, held it toward the room. "This is where we start." I watched from the back as the room, slowly, one person at a time, in the way that groups shift when they encounter someone who actually believes what they're saying, began to lean in. Patricia uncapped her pen again. Marco forgot to look bored. And I sat in my aggressively neutral chair under the committee lighting and thought about what Zara had said on the balcony that morning. I think I know exactly what that feels like. And about instruments that had been trying to say something for a long time, and about the specific, irrational certainty I'd had at 35, eyes and feet, that I had heard something true. She was 40 minutes in when it happened. The Darjeeling portion was done. Successful. Patricia had actually closed her eyes for a moment when she tasted it, which Zara couldn't have seen but somehow seemed to register. And they'd moved to the second sample, a high mountain oolong from Taiwan, when one of the executives, a man in a blue blazer who had been quiet until now, leaned forward and said with the polite aggression of someone who has decided to be the skeptic in the room, "This is all very interesting, but I want to be direct. We're talking about replacing a functional, cost-efficient system with something that requires specialized staff, specialized sourcing, and presumably specialized training. What's the actual ROI case?" The room shifted. That specific shift that happens when someone introduces the language of spreadsheets into a conversation that had been operating in a different register. I watched Zara. She did not shift. She did not tighten. She tilted her head slightly left, that specific tilt, and said, "What's the ROI on your sommelier program?" Blue Blazer blinked. "That's different." "It's identical," she said pleasantly, with the absolute certainty of someone who has had this exact conversation before and has never once lost it. You pay for expertise because expertise creates an experience that guests pay a premium for and return for. Tea is the last frontier of that logic in luxury hospitality. You've already made this argument for wine. I'm asking you to make it for something with a longer history, a wider cultural reach, and a lower barrier to entry. The room was quiet. Patricia was writing something down. Blue Blazer looked at his notepad. "Fair point," he said, which in conference room language is a minor surrender. I texted Bex under the table like a teenager. She just destroyed a guy in a blazer using his own logic, and she did it with a smile. Bex responded in 6 seconds. Marry her. I put my phone face down. The presentation wrapped at 3:45 with Patricia asking 3 detailed follow-up questions that were clearly the questions of someone already planning implementation, rather than someone still deciding. Zara answered each one with the same quality of attention. No hedging, no performance, just the direct engagement of someone who has done the work and trusts it. When it was over, and the room was breaking up into small conversations, Marco appeared at Zara's side to collect the sample tins and managed to knock one off the table. It hit the floor and rolled. Zara heard it, tracked it by sound alone, bent and picked it up in one smooth motion, and handed it back to him without comment. Marco looked like he might actually applaud. I understood the impulse. We walked out into the Chiato afternoon, the street narrow and cobbled and warm in the particular way of Lisbon at 4 p.m., the light doing that golden amber thing that the city specializes in, and that I was starting to associate specifically with the feeling of being slightly outside my own life, in a way that was not, for once, unpleasant. Zara exhaled beside me, long and slow, the exhale of someone releasing something they'd been holding for hours. It went well, I said. It wasn't a question. Patricia wants a pilot program, she said. 3 properties, 6 months, full data collection. She paused. She said yes before she said yes, if that makes sense. You heard it in her questions, I said. Zara smiled. Slow, private. The smile of someone receiving confirmation of something they'd felt, but hadn't said. Exactly. We walked for a moment in comfortable silence, the city doing its afternoon thing around us. Then she said, without preamble, "Thank you for the tea, and for staying." "I told you," I said. "Professional interest." "Ren." Her voice was gentle but exact. "I'm blind, not unperceptive." I looked at the cobblestones. I looked at the street ahead of us. I looked at my hands, which were doing nothing incriminating but felt suddenly very visible. "Okay," I said. "I wanted to see it. I wanted to see you do the thing you're clearly exceptional at." A beat. That wasn't supposed to come out like a confession." "I know," she said, and there was something in her voice, warm and careful and precise, like someone handling something they don't want to break, that made the back of my throat feel strange. But it was a good one. We stopped at a pasteleria on the walk back because Zara said she could smell the pasté de nata from half a block away, and that ignoring that would be a moral failure. We sat at a small table outside with custard tarts and espresso. She'd relented on the rental apartment coffee. Apparently, real espresso was a different category. And the afternoon light came down gold and unhurried on the street around us. She told me about the first time she'd done a tea presentation after losing her sight. A corporate event in Chicago, 18 months post-diagnosis. Her hands shaking slightly as she opened the first tin, terrified that she'd somehow lost access to the thing she was best at. "And then I smelled the first tea," she said, and I realized, oh, it's still there. It's all still there. More, actually, because I wasn't looking at anything anymore. She said it without weight, without the performance of having moved past something, just a fact she'd metabolized completely. I thought about what she'd said that morning. You stop grieving the old way of doing things and start getting genuinely interested in the new way. I thought about the cookbook in my apartment in Brooklyn, with the grocery list inside it that I hadn't opened in 2 months. I thought about Simone and the 3 years and the 4 months of being technically fine. I looked at my espresso cup. "I haven't been interested in anything," I said, quietly and without planning to, "in a long time." The table was small. The afternoon was loud and warm and golden. Zara set her cup down. She didn't say anything immediately. She gave the words the space they needed, which is rarer than it sounds. Then, "What does it feel like?" she asked. "Right now?" She nodded. I looked at the street, at the light, at my hands. Like the beginning of a conversation, I said, with something that's been trying to say something. She was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. Not the crooked half-smile, not the bright, sudden laugh. Something quieter. Something that felt like it was just for here, just for this table, just for the two of us in the Lisbon afternoon. Good, she said softly. Keep listening. There is a moment in the restoration of any instrument where you have done all the structural work, the cracks filled, the seams reglued, the wood stabilized, and what remains is the tuning. This is, counterintuitively, the most delicate part, because the instrument is whole again, but not yet itself. It exists in this suspended state of potential, every string carrying the tension of what it's about to become, and if you rush it, if you tighten too fast, push for the note before the wood is ready to hold it, you risk undoing everything. You have to go slowly. You have to listen. You have to be willing to sit with the almost for as long as it takes. I thought about this at 11 p.m., lying on the bed in the Alfama apartment, staring at the same water-stained ceiling I had abandoned 10 hours earlier, listening to the sounds of Zara moving around in the room across the hall, the soft, specific choreography of her evening, the cane set against the wall. The tea tin opened one more time, the low murmur of what sounded like a voice message being recorded. I was not tuning anything. I was very specifically not doing that. I was simply lying there being extremely normal about the fact that the most interesting person I had encountered in at least 2 years was 8 feet away through a plaster wall, and I had known her for approximately 36 hours. The day had continued after the pastelaria. This was the problem. Or not the problem, but the thing that had made everything more complicated in the specific way that good things make everything more complicated. We had walked back through Chiado and then somehow not gone back to the apartment. Zara had said she wanted to hear the trams, and I had said I knew where to find the best angle for that, and we had ended up on a narrow street in Grassa where the 28 tram comes around a corner in a way that sounds, apparently, like a very specific chord. I had not known this. I knew it now. We had stood on that street for 20 minutes while Zara listened with her whole body, face slightly lifted, head tilted, the particular stillness of someone receiving information through channels most people have stopped developing. And I had watched her and thought about what it meant to pay attention so completely to a single thing that the rest of the world receded. I did this with instruments. I had not done it with a person in a long time. The tram came around the corner and she smiled, sudden and wide and completely unguarded, the smile of someone ambushed by joy, and said, "There it is," in a voice so private I felt like I'd heard something I shouldn't have. I looked away, down the street, at nothing in particular, being extremely normal. We had dinner at a restaurant Zara chose by smell. She'd caught something in the air 2 streets over, and followed it with the confidence of a person who trusts their own navigation completely, and it had led us to a small family-run place with no English menu, and a waiter named Henrique who took one look at us and decided we needed the bacalhau, and the wine and the bread and the patience to enjoy all 3 in the correct order. He was right. The conversation over dinner was the kind that happens when 2 people have stopped performing getting to know you and moved into the different territory of actually knowing each other, not comprehensively, not completely, but in the specific pockets where things are real. She told me about her brother in Atlanta, who called every Sunday and pretended not to worry. I told her about my workshop in Brooklyn and the way it smells in winter, wood shavings and linseed oil and cold, and how it's the only place I've ever felt completely like myself. She asked me when I'd known I wanted to do restoration work, and I told her the true answer, which I don't usually tell, that I'd found a broken violin at a yard sale when I was 11 and spent 3 months figuring out how to fix it by reading library books and watching videos and bothering the music teacher at school, and when I finally played the first note on a string that had been silent for years, I had understood, with the cellular certainty of someone finding their thing, that this was it. She listened to all of this with the quality of attention I was starting to understand was simply how she operated. Fully, without the half-presence that most people bring to conversations, the part of them still composing their response while you're still talking. She was just there, completely there. "What did Simone do?" she asked, somewhere in the middle of the second glass of wine. It was casual, the way she asked it, not delicate, not cautious, just curious, the way she seemed to approach most things. I looked at my glass. "She was an architect," I said. "She designed spaces. We used to joke that I fixed old things and she built new ones, and together we covered the whole spectrum." I paused. It was a good joke for a while. Zara was quiet for a moment. "What happened?" she asked. And the thing about the way she asked it was that it didn't feel like excavation. It felt like an opening. A door held available, not pushed through. "We wanted different things," I said, which was true but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that we had wanted the same things, but at different times and in different proportions, and by the time we understood that the misalignment had become the relationship itself. I didn't say all of this, but I thought Zara heard it anyway, the way she heard the tram coming before it appeared. "The timing thing is its own kind of grief," she said. "Not pity, just recognition." I looked up at her. "Yeah," I said, "it is." Henrique brought dessert, a small plate of pasté de tentugal that neither of us had ordered, with the expression of a man who has correctly assessed that this table needed something sweet. And the subject shifted, and we let it shift, and the evening continued in the golden, unhurried way that Lisbon evenings seem specifically engineered to produce. Walking back to the apartment, the city had gone to its nighttime register. Quieter, warmer, the streets emptier in a way that made the remaining sounds more specific. Our footsteps on cobblestones, a television through an open window. Somewhere close, someone playing fado, low and aching and entirely appropriate, as if the city had curated its own soundtrack for the moment. Zara walked beside me, cane in her right hand, and at some point on a narrow uphill street in Alfama, she said, "Left?" And I said, "Left." And we turned and our arms brushed, and neither of us moved away, and we continued up the hill in that configuration. Not touching, not quite, but close enough that I was aware of the warmth of her arm a centimeter from mine, with an acuity that was frankly embarrassing, given that I was 28 years old, and not a character in a period drama. I did not move away. She did not move away. We walked up the hill and I thought very carefully about the cobblestones and nothing else at all. The apartment building appeared. We went up 4 floors in an elevator designed for 1.5 people. We were briefly very close in a very small space, and I found something extremely interesting to look at on the elevator wall. And Zara was doing the thing where she was absolutely composed, and I was doing the thing where I was composed on the outside and a complete disaster on the inside, which is my signature move. The apartment hallway was quiet. We stopped outside our respective doors. Her room on the left, mine on the right, approximately 4 feet of Portuguese plaster between them. The hallway light was that warm amber that old buildings specialize in, and it caught the angle of her face, and I was aware of looking at her for a moment too long, in the way that becomes impossible to pass off as accidental. She had her keycard in one hand and her cane in the other, and she was turned toward me. That leftward orientation, that quality of attention that made you feel like the most specific thing in the room. "Today was good," she said. Simple, direct, the way she said most things. "Yeah," I said. My voice came out slightly quieter than I intended. It was. A beat. The hallway held the beat. Outside, Lisbon was doing its late-night thing, faint and golden and ancient, and entirely unbothered by the two of us standing in a hallway, having a moment that neither of us had named. "Ren," she said. "Yeah. Thank you. Not for the tea, not for the presentation, not for anything specific. Just thank you. Like the whole day. Like being there. I felt it in the base of my sternum. "You're welcome," I said, and my voice was doing the quiet thing again, and I was not going to examine why. She tilted her head, that left tilt, and for a moment she was just very close and very real, and looking at me without looking at me in the way that she did, which landed differently than anyone else's looking. Then she smiled. The quiet one, the private one, the one that felt like it had a specific address. And she said goodnight and turned toward her door, and I stood in the hallway after it closed and did not move for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. I texted Bex. Nothing happened. She responded immediately. That's not what nothing looks like. I went into my room. I lay on the bed. I stared at the water stain. The almost hung in the room like a held note. Present, specific, full of the particular tension of something that knows what it wants to be, but is not there yet. And this is the part where I tell you that I am, professionally and personally, a person who understands that you cannot rush a tuning, that the instrument has to be ready, that the almost is not a failure. It's a stage, an essential one. I knew all of this. I believed all of this. I was also losing my mind in an apartment in Alfama because a woman I had known for 36 hours had said thank you in a hallway and smiled the private smile and gone into her room, and I was lying here listening to the sounds of her evening through the wall, the tea tin, the soft voice message, the city outside, and feeling, for the first time in 6 months, genuinely, terrifyingly, inconveniently alive. I closed my eyes. Across the hall, Zara's voice stopped. The apartment went quiet. Lisbon breathed outside, and somewhere in the specific almost of 11 p.m., in a rented apartment in the Alfama district of a city that had been having the same conversation with the ocean for 500 years, I finally, genuinely, completely fell asleep. I have a theory about mornings after almost moments. The theory is this: the morning is a test, not a dramatic one, not the kind with obvious questions and clear answers, but the quiet, domestic kind where the almost has to survive contact with daylight and coffee breath and the specific vulnerability of being a person before you've had time to construct yourself into one. The almost either holds or it doesn't. I discovered this theory at 7 a.m. when I walked into the kitchen and Zara was already there, sitting at the table with her tea and her phone, hair loose, wearing an oversized gray sweatshirt that said Atlanta across the front in faded letters, and she looked up, oriented toward me, and said, "Morning," in a voice that was still rough with sleep, and I felt the almost hold, firmly, without apology, which was its own kind of terrifying. I said, "Morning," back, and went for the espresso maker, and we existed in the kitchen in our established parallel, and I thought, okay, this is a thing that is happening. I am a person to whom this is currently happening. That's fine. That's completely fine. The espresso maker chose this moment to malfunction, producing a sound like a small engine failing, and I stood there pressing the handle in 3 different configurations while it continued its dying performance. And Zara said, without looking up from her phone, "Have you tried the reset button on the bottom?" I turned the thing over. There was a reset button. I pressed it. It worked immediately. "How did you know that?" I asked. "I stayed in this apartment last year," she said, with the serenity of someone who has just produced a perfect card from a deck nobody knew she was holding. I stared at her. "You've stayed here before?" In this apartment. The collector you're working with recommends it to everyone who comes through for work," she said, picking up her tea. Small world. She was smiling at her phone. I turned back to the espresso maker and made a private decision to never tell Bex this story, because she would find it cosmically significant in a way I was not prepared to engage with before coffee. The day had structure, which helped. I had the Sintra meeting at 11. The collector, whose name was Augusto, had been gracious about the delay and was expecting me at his home with the 1743 cello, in a room he referred to in his emails as the music room, which told me everything I needed to know about Augusto. Zara had follow-up calls with Patricia's team through the morning, and then a free afternoon before her evening flight back to New York. Free afternoon in Lisbon. I noted this information. I did not immediately act on it. I was being restrained. I was being a mature adult who did not restructure her professional schedule around a woman she'd met on a plane 2 days ago. I ate breakfast. I packed my tool bag. I was halfway to the door when Zara said, from the kitchen, "What time do you think you'll be done in Sintra?" I stopped, turned. She was still at the table, cup in both hands, face oriented toward the doorway where I was standing. 2, maybe 2:30, I said. "Why?" She tilted her head. "I've never been to the Alfama market," she said. "Apparently it's on Tuesday afternoons. I thought if you were back in time—" She stopped. A small pause that was doing a lot of work. "I know the city better than I did 2 days ago," she said. And there was something careful in it, something that was asking without quite asking. I held the doorway for a moment. "I'll be back by 2, I said. She picked up her tea. "Okay," she said, in the tone of someone who is being very composed about being pleased. Augusto was 73 years old, compact and silver-haired, with the focused intensity of a man who had been collecting instruments for 50 years and knew exactly what he had. The music room was exactly what I'd expected. High ceilings, controlled humidity, instruments in various states of display and storage, the particular reverent hush of a space that takes its contents seriously. The cello was in the corner, in a case that was itself a historical artifact. He opened it with the deliberateness of a ceremony. I leaned in. And then I forgot about everything else, because the cello was extraordinary. The varnish cracked in a specific pattern that told me about the climate it had lived in. The seam separation at the upper bout, suggesting a repair attempt sometime in the 19th century that had been well-intentioned and not quite right. The scroll with a small chip that was, on closer inspection, original to the instrument and not damage at all. I ran my fingers along the body with the light, reading touch that years of this work had developed. Somewhere in the back of my mind, in the part that was not entirely focused on the instrument, I thought about Zara at the airport in Bairro Alto, holding the tea canister close, the recognition on her face when she found what she was looking for. Different languages, same fluency. I kept working. Augusto made espresso, the real kind, the kind that tasted like it had opinions, and we sat at a table in the music room while I walked him through my preliminary assessment. He listened with the specific quality of someone who knows enough about the subject to evaluate what they're hearing. I liked him immediately. He asked precise questions. I gave precise answers. At one point, he asked how I'd found his apartment recommendation, and I said a colleague had referred me, and he nodded and said it was a good space. He'd sent many people there over the years, and I smiled into my espresso and said it had been fine. He walked me to the train at 1:15 with the cello assessment agreed and the restoration timeline set, and the quiet satisfaction of a professional encounter that had gone exactly as it should. On the train back to Lisbon, I sat by the window and watched the Portuguese landscape, rocky hills and cork trees, and the occasional village arranged on a hillside like it had grown there. And I thought about the cello and the 6 months of work ahead of me, and the way some things that look beyond saving are simply waiting for the right person to look carefully enough. I was aware that I was also thinking about something else. I allowed this awareness without engaging with it directly. The train pulled into Oriente. I switched to the metro. I texted Zara. On my way back, 20 minutes. She responded with the name of a street corner in Alfama. I was there in 18. The market was the organized, beautiful chaos of a place that knows what it is. Narrow streets strung with lights not yet lit in the afternoon sun. Vendors with tiles and vintage linens and old books, and the kind of ceramics that make you start doing optimistic math about your luggage weight allowance. Zara moved through it with me beside her in the configuration we'd established on the uphill street the night before. Close but not quite touching. The proximity of two people who have stopped pretending the proximity is incidental. She wanted to find something to bring her brother. Something that smelled like Lisbon, she said, which was a specific brief that the vendors engaged with varying degrees of enthusiasm. At the fourth stall we found it. A small cedar box with a tile inlaid on the lid, and when Zara held it and opened it and brought it to her face, I watched her breathe it in and smile and say, "Yes, that's it," with the conviction of someone whose yes means something. I paid again. She let me. She was keeping a running tally, she informed me. She would settle it when we were back in New York. I said there was no tally. She said there was absolutely a tally. I decided not to argue with a woman who had dismantled a man in a blazer with one sentence the day before. We were at a stall selling old photographs, black and white, strangers' lives, the anonymous intimacy of other people's histories, when she said, without preamble, the way she said most of the things that mattered, "Can I ask you something direct?" "You've been direct since the plane," I said. "I know," she said, "but this is a different kind of direct." I turned from the photographs. She was facing me. That full left orientation, that quality of attention that made me feel like the only specific thing in a very wide radius. "What are you afraid of?" she asked. I opened my mouth, closed it. The market went on around us, voices and music and the particular ambient warmth of a Tuesday afternoon in Lisbon. I looked at a photograph of two women standing on a bridge somewhere, laughing at something outside the frame, caught in a moment of complete unself-consciousness. "I think," I said slowly, choosing the words with the care I give to things I don't want to break. "I'm afraid of starting something I can't finish." She was quiet, listening. "Simone and I stopped, started again. I thought I was paying attention. To us. To what we needed. And I missed it. I missed the moment where it started going wrong. And I fix things for a living. I'm supposed to notice." My voice was doing the quiet thing. I let it. "So yeah, I'm afraid of..." I gestured vaguely at the air between us, missing it again. The market moved around us. A vendor called out something in Portuguese. Somewhere nearby, a child was doing something that made several adults laugh. Zara reached out, deliberate, measured, not uncertain at all, and found my hand, not holding it, just her fingers resting against mine, light and specific, like a note placed carefully on a string. "You're not missing anything," she said quietly. "I know," I said, and my voice was doing the very quiet thing now. "That's the part that's scaring me." She laughed, soft, not the bright gate laugh, something more private, and her fingers pressed slightly against mine, and we stood at a stall full of strangers' photographs in a Lisbon market on a Tuesday afternoon, and I thought about the almost and the held note, and the instrument that can't be rushed, and I thought, okay, I hear it. I hear what it's trying to say. "Dinner," she said, "before my flight, somewhere with real wine." "Yeah," I said. My voice had gone completely quiet now. "Dinner." Her flight was at 9. We had until 7:30. We went to a restaurant in Moraria. Candlelit, small. The kind of place where the tables are too close together and nobody minds because the food is worth it. And we ate slowly and talked in the way that people talk when they know there's an ending coming, and they're not ready to look at it directly. She told me about the city in Japan, where she'd had the best tea of her life. A small farm in Uji. A woman in her 80s who had been growing the same cultivar for 50 years, the specific green of the matcha in the bowl. I told her about the first time I heard a restored instrument played by someone who could actually play. A Viennese violin, 1801. 6 months of my work, a violinist who made it sound like weather. We ordered dessert. We didn't need dessert. We ordered it anyway because it extended the evening by 20 minutes, and neither of us was willing to be the one to say out loud that's what we were doing. The candle between us burned low. The restaurant thinned, The city outside went gold, and then purple, and then the specific dark of a Lisbon evening that knows what it's doing. At 7:15, I called a cab. At 7:20, we were outside the restaurant on a cobblestone street in Muraria, and the cab was 4 minutes away, and the evening had the specific weight of something that is almost over and knows it. She was facing me on the street. 4 minutes. The city quiet around us in its nighttime way. I thought about the hallway last night, the held moment, the private smile, the good night. I thought about her fingers against mine at the market. I thought about 7 words spoken in a dream at 35, Zurzurend feet that I still hadn't asked her about, because asking felt like opening something I wasn't sure I was ready to hold. 3 minutes. Zara, I said. She tilted her head. I heard you, I said. On the plane, talking in your sleep. The street held very still. She was quiet for a moment, not surprised exactly. More like recognizing the arrival of something she'd wondered about. What did I say? She asked. Her voice was careful. Not defensive, just careful. You said you didn't want to turn gray before you got there, I said. I've been thinking about it since. 2 minutes. She breathed in slowly, out slowly. I dream about color sometimes, she said, the way I remember it. And in the dream, I'm always trying to get somewhere. I never know where. And I'm afraid that if I don't get there soon, everything will go gray. She paused. It's not a sad dream, usually. It's more urgent. She said the word like it contained something she hadn't said out loud before. Where do you think there is? I asked quietly. 1 minute. She tilted her head up slightly. That gesture I'd come to understand was her version of looking at the sky. I think it's different every time, she said. But tonight, she stopped. The cab turned onto the street, headlights finding us on the cobblestones. She turned toward me fully. Tonight, I think I know exactly where it is, she said. The cab pulled up. She picked up her bag. I stood on the street and felt the almost holding, taut and specific, and full of everything that hadn't been said yet, and was not lost. Just not yet. She got to the cab door, stopped, turned back. And she smiled. The private one, the specific one, the one with the address, and said, New York is very small, Wren Calloway. The cab door closed. I stood on the cobblestones in Muraria and watched the taillights until the street turned. Then I stood there a little longer. The city breathed around me. I put my hands in my pockets. I looked up at the Lisbon sky, purple and ancient and completely unbothered. And I thought, with the specific cellular certainty of someone who has just heard a long silent string finally hold its note. There it is. New York is not a small city. New York is 8 million people and 300 square miles, and the specific organized chaos of a place that has decided proximity does not equal connection, and enforces this philosophy with impressive consistency. I know this because I had lived there for 6 years and managed to go entire months without running into people I actively knew, which in a city that size is not a failure of social infrastructure, but simply how the physics work. And yet, Zara had said New York is very small, standing on a cobblestone street in Muraria with a cab waiting. And I had spent the 11-day remainder of my Lisbon trip. The cello assessment, the preliminary documentation, the 3 dinners I ate alone in good restaurants while reading and not thinking about anything in particular, turning that sentence over with the specific attention I give to things I don't fully understand yet. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't quite a statement. It occupied the specific linguistic territory of something that wants to be both without committing to either, which is either very romantic or very maddening depending on your current emotional constitution. Mine was not stable enough to render a verdict. I flew home on a Thursday, JFK at 6 a.m., gray and loud and aggressively un-Lisbon. I took the subway home because I am a person of principle, and the cab line was 40 minutes. I walked into my apartment in Brooklyn, which smelled like wood shavings and old things, and the particular cold of a space that had been waiting. And I put my bag down and stood in the kitchen and looked at the cookbook on the shelf. I opened it. I took out the grocery list. I read it once. Oat milk. The good kind. Fresh basil. Don't forget. And then I folded it smaller and put it in the recycling bin under the sink. Not dramatically. Not as a statement. Just as a thing that needed to be done and hadn't been done yet and was now done. Then I made coffee and called Bex. She answered on the first ring, which meant she had been waiting, which meant she had been waiting for 11 days, which is the specific dedication of a best friend who respects your processing time, but has absolute limits on it. Talk, she said. Good morning to you too, I said. Wren Elizabeth Calloway. It has been 11 days, she said. I have been patient. I have sent supportive memes. I have not asked questions. I am now asking questions. I told her everything. The shoulder, the 7 words, the tea in Barrow Alto, the presentation, the market, the hallway, the fingers against mine, the cab. I told her about the cobblestone street, and what Zara had said, and how I had stood there after the taillights disappeared for longer than was meteorologically advisable. Bex was quiet through most of it, which for Bex is the conversational equivalent of climbing Everest. When I finished, she said, New York is small. Yes. And then she got in the cab. Yes. That's not a goodbye. Wren. I know. That's a see you soon said by someone who doesn't do unnecessary words. I looked at my coffee. I know, I said, quieter. So what are you going to do? Bex asked. I looked at the shelf where the cookbook was, at the space where the grocery list wasn't anymore. I don't know yet, I said, but I think I'm going to stop being afraid of finding out. The workshop helped. It always does. There's something about the specific demands of restoration work, the attention it requires, the way it anchors you in the physical reality of the thing in front of you, that quiets the part of the brain that would otherwise spend all its time narrating. I threw myself into the preliminary documentation for the Lisbon cello, which was going to be shipped in 3 weeks and would occupy me for the better part of 6 months. I cataloged the existing damage, researched comparable restorations from the period, ordered the specific hide glue and spruce cleats I'd need, had 3 long emails with Augusto about the 19th century repair attempt and what to do about it. I was professional and focused and completely engaged. I also checked my phone more than was consistent with any of those adjectives. Not obsessively, just regularly. The way you check the weather when you know something is coming and you want to know when. 4 days after I got back, a message came. Not a text, a voice message, which I had not expected, and which meant I had to find somewhere private to listen to it, which in my workshop meant sitting in the storage room with the door closed like a teenager, which is the dignity that romantic feelings afford you at 28. I pressed play. Her voice came through the speaker, warm and direct and slightly amused, like she knew exactly what I was doing when I listened to this. Wren, I'm back in the city. I have a question, and I'm asking it directly because that's what I do. A pause. There's a tea event at a shop in the West Village on Saturday. A tasting. The owner is someone I trained under, and she does these quarterly, and they're genuinely worth your time, even if you don't care about tea, which I think you do, actually. Another pause. Shorter. Come. Noon. I'll send you the address. She sent the address. I sat in the storage room for a moment. Then I texted Bex. Saturday noon, West Village. She responded in 3 seconds with 17 consecutive exclamation points and what I can only describe as an emotionally aggressive string of emojis. I put my phone away. I went back to the cello documentation. I was extremely calm about everything. Saturday arrived the way Saturdays do when you've been thinking about them. too fast, and at the same time with the specific slowness of something you've been both dreading and wanting. The tea shop was on a quiet block in the West Village, the kind of block that New York produces occasionally as if to prove it can. Tree-lined, brownstones, the light coming through the leaves in a way that felt curated. The shop itself was small and serious in the way of places that are genuinely good at what they do and don't need to announce it. The window displayed 3 ceramic teapots and nothing else. I arrived at 11:58, because arriving exactly on time is for people who haven't been thinking about this for 6 days. Zara was already there. Of course she was. Standing near the front with the shop owner, a small, precise woman in her 60s named Eleanor, who had the focused energy of someone who has spent decades in passionate service of a single thing and has no patience for anything that isn't. They were deep in conversation. Zara had her back mostly to the door, but she turned as I came in, before the bell above the door finished its small announcement, before Eleanor looked up, and said, "Ren." Just my name, but in the specific tone of someone who is genuinely glad you showed up, who had wondered in the private way whether you would, and who is not performing the gladness. It landed in the center of my chest like a placed note. "Hey," I said, extremely articulate, a credit to language everywhere. Eleanor's tasting was the kind of experience that reframes a thing permanently. She took 8 people through 5 teas over 90 minutes with the focused, unsentimental precision of someone who has been doing this for 40 years and has distilled it to what actually matters. Zara sat beside me at the long wooden table and occasionally leaned in to say something low. Context, history, a specific thing to notice. And her voice at that proximity, that register, did things to my concentration that I was managing with the effort of someone walking a tightrope while pretending to stroll. At one point, Eleanor had us hold the cup in both hands and just breathe the steam before drinking, and in the specific silence that followed, Zara's shoulder was against mine, and neither of us moved, and the tea smelled like something I didn't have a word for, and the room was very quiet, and my heart was doing something it hadn't done in a long time, which is to say it was making itself known. After, Eleanor took Zara aside for what was clearly a separate conversation, the two of them moving to the back of the shop with the specific ease of a teacher and a student who have long since become colleagues. I found a spot near the window and looked out at the West Village block and thought about the Lisbon market and the cobblestones and the cab. And I thought about Bex, who had texted me that morning. "Today's the day. Stop being the instrument and be the musician for once." I had not responded to this because it was too accurate to reward with acknowledgement. Zara found me by the window 20 minutes later. Eleanor had gone to help another customer. The shop had thinned to a few people lingering over their cups. The West Village afternoon was doing its considered thing outside the glass. "Eleanor says you ask good questions," Zara said, arriving beside me, facing the same direction, the window, the street, the light through the trees. "I asked 2 questions," I said. "She gives points for quality," she said. A beat. The street outside was quiet. A woman walked past with a dog that was absolutely the size of a small horse. "I've been thinking," Zara said, in the tone that precedes something real, "about what you said on the street. In Muraria." I waited. "About being afraid of missing it," she said. "The moment where something starts going wrong." She paused. "I've been thinking about it because I understand it differently." I looked at her profile. She was facing the window. The particular forward orientation she used when she was thinking something through carefully. "When I lost my sight," she said, "there was a period where I was terrified of exactly that, of missing things, of the world changing and me not knowing, not catching it in time." She paused. "And then I realized, the things that matter don't disappear silently. They announce themselves, in the way something feels, in the way someone sounds when they say your name." She turned toward me then. Full left orientation, that quality of attention. "You haven't missed anything, Ren," she said. "I want you to know that. You haven't missed a single thing." The shop was quiet around us. Outside, the West Village continued its afternoon. I looked at her and felt the same almost that had lived in the Alfama hallway and the Muraria street and the market by the photographs. And I felt it shift. Not resolve, not yet, but shift. The way a string shifts when the tension is exactly right, when it's ready. "Zara," I said. My voice was doing the quiet thing. "Yeah. I'd really like to take you to dinner," I said. Not as a thank you, not as a continuation of Lisbon, as a start. The word sat between us, small and specific and entirely committed. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "That took you long enough," she said, and the crooked half-smile appeared, the bright one, the gate laugh one, the one that made the space around her feel more awake. I laughed, surprised and relieved, and something else I wasn't ready to name in a tea shop in the West Village. "I was being careful," I said. "I know," she said. "I liked watching you be careful." She tilted her head. "Dinner. Yes, somewhere with good bread." "I know a place," I said. "Of course you do," she said. We walked out of the tea shop into the West Village afternoon. The light through the trees, the brownstones, the city doing its improbable quiet thing on this particular block. She was beside me and I was beside her, and the city stretched out ahead of us, 8 million people and 300 square miles. And it felt, in that specific improbable way of things that are actually happening, exactly like Zara had said on a cobblestone street in Muraria. Very, very small. My phone buzzed. Bex. One voice message, 12 seconds. I played it with one earbud in, half listening while we walked. She didn't say anything for 8 of the 12 seconds. Then, "I can literally feel it from here. Finally." I smiled at the sidewalk, put the phone away. Beside me, Zara said, "Bex?" "Bex," I confirmed. "What did she say?" I considered. "She said, finally," I said. Zara laughed, the bright gate laugh, completely unguarded, lighting up the West Village block like something being switched on. "Smart woman," she said. "The best," I said. We kept walking. The city moved around us, indifferent and magnificent. And for the first time in 6 months, maybe longer, maybe since before Simone, maybe since the yard sale violin at 11 years old, I was not fixing something or assessing something or waiting for something to reveal what was wrong with it. I was just walking, next to someone, through a city that was, against all geographic evidence, exactly as small as she'd said it was. There is a moment in every restoration, and I mean every single one, without exception, in 15 years of doing this work, where the instrument plays its first note after being silent. Not the testing notes you play during the process, the careful incremental checks to see if the repair is holding, the structural confirmations. I mean the first real note, the one where everything is ready and you draw the bow and the wood remembers what it is. It never sounds perfect in that moment. There's always more work ahead, more settling, more adjustment, but it sounds true. And true in this work is worth more than perfect. It is the proof that the thing was worth saving. It is the moment you know. I thought about this on the night of our first dinner. A Tuesday, 3 days after the tea shop, a small Italian place in Carroll Gardens that had been there since 1987 and had absolutely no interest in being fashionable about it. Red checkered tablecloths, candles and wine bottles, bread that arrived without being requested because the owner, a compact Neapolitan man named Sal, had decided 40 years ago that people who needed to ask for bread were people he couldn't help. I had been here twice before with Bex, once after a difficult breakup that predated Simone, once to celebrate a particularly complicated restoration. It was the kind of place you brought things that mattered. I had called ahead. Sal had given me the corner table without being asked, which meant either he remembered me, or he understood something about the evening that I hadn't fully articulated to myself yet. Possibly both. Sal is perceptive. Zara arrived exactly on time in a dark green dress, and the kind of unhurried confidence that makes an entrance without trying to, cane in one hand, the cedar box from the Alfama market tucked under her arm. I stood when I saw her, an automatic thing, not performed. And she oriented toward me across the restaurant with the specific quality of attention that I had spent the last 2 weeks cataloging in my memory like field notes. "You brought the box," I said when she reached the table. "I'm giving it to Marcus tomorrow," she said, setting it carefully on the empty chair beside her. "Wanted you to see it one more time in context." She sat down. I sat down. Sal appeared with bread, and the expression of a man who has seen a great many first dinners and has opinions about this one. He said something in Italian that I didn't catch, and Zara responded in what was apparently conversational Italian, and he laughed and disappeared back to the kitchen. "You speak Italian," I said. "Enough to make Sal like me," she said, "which I'm told is the only metric that matters here." "He gave us the corner table," I said. "That's the highest metric," she said, tearing a piece of bread with the decisive efficiency of someone who has never once been uncertain about bread. The candle between us threw warm light across the table. Outside, Carroll Gardens was doing its Brooklyn Tuesday thing, quiet and residential and entirely unconcerned with the specific significance of what was happening at the corner table of a 40-year-old Italian restaurant. I was grateful for its discretion. We talked for 4 hours. This is the number I remember because Sal came by at the 2-hour mark to take our dessert order, and at the 4-hour mark to let us know, with great gentleness and no actual urgency, that he was thinking of closing up, but we were welcome to finish. The conversation moved the way good conversations do, when two people have already established the territory of honesty and are now exploring its interior. Not chronologically, not strategically, just following the thread wherever it went. She told me about her parents in Savannah. Her mother, who called every morning at 8, and pretended the calls were practical when they were really just her mother listening to make sure she was okay. Her father, who had learned Braille at 67, so he could leave her handwritten notes in a language she could read. I told her about my grandmother in Maine, who had taught me to listen. Really listen. The way you listen to a room when you walk in, and something feels different. The way you listen to wood when you tap it and hear whether it's hollow. She said everything in the world is trying to tell you something, I said. You just have to get quiet enough to hear it. Zara was holding her wine glass in both hands, the way she held her teacups. She sounds extraordinary, she said. She was, I said. She died when I was 19. I think I've been doing this work partly to stay in conversation with her. I hadn't said that out loud before. Not to Bex. Not to my therapist, who I was now actually attending regularly. Not to anyone. It arrived on the table between us with the slight surprise of something that had been waiting to be said. Zara set her glass down. She reached across the table, deliberate, unhurried, the same quality of intention she brought to everything, and her hand found mine on the tablecloth. Not the light touch from the market. This was different. This was her hand over mine, warm and specific and entirely present. She'd be proud of the work, she said quietly. Not a consolation, a statement. The kind that people make when they've assessed something carefully and arrived at a conclusion they're confident in. I looked at our hands on the red checkered tablecloth in the candlelight of a 40-year-old restaurant in Carroll Gardens and felt something in my chest do the thing it had been building toward for 2 weeks. Not dramatically, not with the lightning bolt quality of movie moments, but with the specific quiet resonance of a string finding its note. True, not perfect. True, which is better. Zara, I said. My voice was doing the quiet thing. She squeezed my hand once, small, firm, present. I know, she said. Me too. Which was, I thought, exactly the right number of words for the moment. Sal came by to check on us with the expression of a man who has seen this specific exchange before and considers it among the better outcomes of the restaurant business. He brought us 2 small glasses of limoncello that neither of us had ordered. He said something in Italian and left. "What did he say?" I asked. Zara was smiling the private smile. "He said some things don't need a menu," she said. The weeks that followed were the kind of weeks that rearrange themselves in memory into something that feels more like a single extended moment than a sequence of days. Tuesday dinners at Sal's that became a standing arrangement so quickly that Sal had the corner table reserved before we called. Saturday mornings in my workshop, Zara on the old wooden stool I kept for clients, her tea tin on the workbench, the specific domestic harmony of 2 people working in companionable parallel while I assessed the newly arrived Lisbon cello, and she prepared for client calls. She never asked me to explain what I was doing in those mornings. She just listened to the sounds of the work, the occasional tap of the wood, the small vocabulary of the restoration process. And sometimes she would say something, a question or an observation, that landed with the precision of someone who understood the language even without the vocabulary. "It sounds different than yesterday," she said one morning, 3 weeks in, while I was testing a seam repair on the lower bout. I looked up. "The tone when you tap it," she said, more settled. She was right. She was exactly right. I set the cello down and looked at her on the wooden stool with her tea and her phone and her burnt orange jacket. She had a thing for warm colors, I'd learned, chose them specifically, said she liked knowing the warmth was there. And I thought, there it is again. True. Completely true. Bex met her on a Sunday in October. Brunch at a place in Fort Greene that Bex had chosen on the grounds that the eggs were excellent and the lighting was good for observing people, which told me everything about Bex's agenda. She arrived 8 minutes late, which was her version of punctual, and spent the first 5 minutes talking to Zara about the tea program in a way that made it obvious she had done research, which was both touching and completely on brand. Then she turned to me across the table while Zara was reading the menu on her phone and gave me the specific look. Wide eyes, tiny nod, the face of someone confirming a thesis they were already 90% sure of. I looked at my coffee. She kicked me gently under the table. Later, walking home while Zara stopped to take a call, Bex fell into step beside me and said nothing for half a block, which was its own kind of communication. Then, "She finishes your sentences without finishing your sentences," she said. "I know," I said. "She hears what you mean, not just what you say." "I know," I said, quieter. Bex nodded slowly, the nod of someone putting a period on something. "Good," she said. "That's the one you don't let go of." I looked at the Brooklyn sidewalk, at the October trees, at Zara half a block ahead, laughing at something on the phone, her free hand moving in the specific expressive way it did when she was animated, the burnt orange of her jacket bright against the gray fall afternoon. "I know," I said, for the 3rd time. But this time it sounded different. This time it sounded like, "I know." The night I played the Lisbon cello for the first time, 6 months after Augusto's music room, the restoration complete, the instrument ready, I called Zara before I called anyone else. This surprised me slightly, and not at all. She came to the workshop on a Thursday evening in March, the city doing its early spring thing outside. Cold still, but with the specific quality of light that means it's thinking about changing. She sat on the wooden stool with her tea, and I stood with the cello and the bow and the particular focused stillness that precedes a first note. The workshop was quiet. Outside, Brooklyn. "Ready?" she said. "I think so," I said. "The instrument or you?" "Both," I said. She smiled. "The private one." "Then play," she said. I drew the bow. The first note came. Not perfect, never perfect on the first try after a long silence, but true, clear, resonant. the 1743 cello remembering in one long exhale of sound everything it had ever known how to be. I felt it through the wood and into my hands and up through my arms and into the center of my chest, where it landed with the specific fullness of something that has been worth every single day of the work. The note held. The workshop held it with us. And then, because I couldn't not, I looked at Zara on the wooden stool. Her face lifted slightly toward the sound, her expression completely open, completely present, completely there. And I thought about Gate 14 at JFK, and a shoulder and 7 words and a city that was apparently very small, and a woman who had walked into a strange city without a map and known exactly where she was. I thought about the almost, and the held note, and the true thing that is worth more than perfect. I thought about my grandmother's voice. Everything in the world is trying to tell you something. You just have to get quiet enough to hear it. The note finally finished. The workshop breathed. Zara lowered her face from the sound. She turned toward me. Full orientation, full attention. The quality of presence that had been, from the first moment in a dark airplane cabin, the most specific thing I had ever felt directed at me. "Well," she said, and her voice was soft with something that I recognized because I felt it too. That was worth the wait. I set the bow down. I crossed the workshop in 4 steps. The workbench, the tool rack, the wooden stool. And when I reached her, I stood in front of her, and her face turned up toward me, and I could feel the warmth of her before I moved any closer, and I said her name once. Just her name. And she said mine back, and the space between us was small and specific, and full of everything we'd been building since a plane went dark over the Atlantic, and a stranger's head found a stranger's shoulder, and 7 words changed the whole geometry of what was possible. I leaned in slowly. She tilted her face up the last fraction. The kiss was quiet and warm and entirely unhurried, the kind that knows it doesn't need to be anything more than what it is, that the work has been done, that the instrument is ready. It was the first note. It was true. Outside, the city went on being the city. 8 million people and 300 square miles, ancient and golden and magnificent. And, in this specific workshop on this specific Thursday in March, exactly as small as it needed to be. Inside, the 1743 cello rested on its stand, finally itself again after 280 years, and 6 months, and 1 very long flight. And Zara was laughing. The bright gate laugh, the unguarded one, the one that makes the space around her feel more awake. And I was laughing too, and her forehead was against mine, and the workshop smelled like wood shavings and linseed oil and her tea, and I thought, there it is. There. It finally is. The first note. The true one. The one that was always there, waiting in the wood, waiting to be heard by someone who had finally gotten quiet enough to listen. I had fixed a lot of broken things in my life. I had never, until now, understood that the most important restoration was the one that had been happening to me. That's the story. All of it. The shoulder on a plane, the 7 words, the city that kept getting smaller until it was just this, a workshop in Brooklyn, a cello that remembered itself, a woman who heard everything I never said out loud. If you made it here, you were with me through the whole thing. And I want you to know. That means something. Drop a comment below. Tell me the moment that got you. Tell me if you've ever heard something that wasn't meant for you and couldn't let it go. I read every single one. And if this is the first story of ours you've seen, subscribe. Because there are more. There are always more stories about the people who find each other in the spaces between what they meant to do and what they actually needed. I'll see you in the next one.